At 6 o'clock, the alarm went off as usual, heralding the start of a new day. 00, heralding the start of a new day. My wife Jessica and I reluctantly got out of bed, welcoming the early morning light with a groan, feeling the weight of my exhaustion as I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. I smiled back, recalling last night's escapades. She certainly knew how to keep things interesting. Today marked the beginning of Jessica's business trip, and the week ahead would be my own protection. I briefly considered joining her as the sound of the shower filled the room, but in the end decided to give in. Last night had taken its toll on me and I needed a little time to recover. Jessica came back into the bedroom full of energy, a stark contrast to my laziness. She playfully prodded me. Okay, I'll be done in a minute," I mumbled and dragged my tired body to the bathroom for a shower and some much-needed energy. We ended up having breakfast downstairs again and then went our separate ways. Jessica went to the airport while I started the daily grind. Jessica was an attorney and she and I both worked at a medium-sized manufacturing plant on Street Lewis. Her specialty was negotiation and she often traveled with her team to work out of town. I found myself completely mesmerized by her charm and demeanor. "My name is John Baker. I work for the same company as my wife. I'm an engineer, 37 years old, 1.6 meters tall and weigh 165 pounds. Our love story began at a company picnic. I could tell right away that she was the one for me, and it was obvious that our feelings for each other were mutual. We began a whirlwind courtship and tied the knot 6 months later. And Jessica was going to stop taking birth control pills. Upon returning from this trip, we eagerly anticipated the next chapter of our life together. Tears came to my eyes as she sat in the driver's seat. "I hope I don't have to endure this kind of goodbye, honey. I long for the day when I don't have to travel anymore," she exclaimed. "I hate this kind of goodbye just as much as you do, honey." I assured her we'd see you Friday night. "We'll simply have some takeout so you can rest." "Sounds like a goodbye to me," she replied before driving off. I stood in the driveway waving goodbye until their car disappeared from my sight, then trudged back inside to finish my morning routine and head to the office. I grabbed my coffee and headed for my boss's office, and as soon as I entered he jumped up and gestured for me to sit down. "Given your extensive experience with one of our models, would you be interested in traveling to San Jose to check it out? There's not much going on here right now, and you're right, I'm flying solo this week, so when would you need me to come over right away?" "Sounds like a great plan. I'll get right on it." I feel a sudden surge of enthusiasm. "I'll go home and pack right away. I'll fly out this afternoon and get to my client in the morning. Safe travels." I eagerly went home and packed my bags, and as I drove, I worked out a plan in my mind that if I could get the job done quickly, I could take a detour through Denver to surprise Jessica on the way back. I tried calling Jessica's cell phone but she didn't pick up. I left her a voicemail telling her that I was staying with my family for a few days and that I could be reached on my cell phone in the evening. After checking out of the San Jose hotel, I rushed to the San Francisco airport and enjoyed dinner before my flight. During dinner, Jessica called me and we had a brief conversation. After confirming my identity, the hotel staff gave me a key card to her suite, and I crept into her room to find a light on the computer desk and her laptop turned off, but Jessica was nowhere to be found. I shook off my initial confusion and assumed that Jessica hadn't returned to her room and debated whether to wait or go to the lounge to see where she was. As I tiptoed towards the bedroom door, my stomach lurched and a cold sweat broke out. My first instinct was to rush in and confront Jessica, venting my anger on the man lying on the bed. I recalibrated my camera for the dim light and turned off the flash. I approached the door to the other bedroom and stood quietly, discreetly snapping a few shots of what was happening on the bed to make sure neither of them noticed my presence. Before leaving Jessica's suite, I rummaged through the open briefcase on my desk and found a business card belonging to David Price, the chief negotiator for our company. I connected my camera to her laptop with the camera/computer interface cable I had brought with me. Our laptops shared a photo program and transferring photos from my camera to her laptop was a simple matter. I left her suite in silence, doing my best to restrain my emotions and fight back tears as I walked to the elevator, the weight of betrayal weighing heavily on me. A 30A flight that would get me home by 9:30 a.m. I had to be there by 9:30 a.m., but I had to be there by 9:30 a.m. to get home. I calculated that this time would coincide with when Jessica usually opened her laptop at the negotiating table, which would be the moment she realized she'd been caught signaling the end of our marriage. I then rushed back to the airport and checked into a nearby motel, where, despite my state of agitation, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Instead, I replayed the heart-wrenching scene from Jessica's hotel room in my mind over and over again, allowing myself to release my repressed emotions through tears. When I returned to Louise Street, my cell phone started ringing. I got into my car, looked at the caller ID. It was Jessica calling. I ignored it, turned off my cell phone, and returned home. As soon as I entered my house, the landline started ringing, looked at the caller ID. It was Jessica calling. I listened in silence as her tearful pleas echoed through the room. "John, please call me right away. I need to talk to you, honey, it's important." I ignored Jessica's tearful pleas and went upstairs to change, then went out and rented a U. Upon arriving home, I quickly began to pack in an effort to move out of the house by the time Jessica arrived at approximately 4:00 p.m. Within a couple hours, I managed to move all of my personal belongings into a rented storage unit. Prior to packing, I made an appointment with our attorney to begin the divorce process that afternoon. In addition, I instructed my attorney to update my will to include my brother as the sole beneficiary. At the bank, I transferred half of our savings and checking balances to a new account in my name. I then contacted my investment advisor to have them take similar action on our joint investment account. It was with a heavy heart that I drove to my parents' house, carrying my suitcase, and walked in through the open door. I explained the situation to them. They were appalled by Jessica's cheating behavior and the impending end of our marriage, and seeking refuge, I asked them if I could stay with them temporarily until I could find a furnished apartment, which they readily agreed to do. 0 p.m. Just as we were getting ready to eat dinner, the doorbell rang and my father, Ross, answered the door and returned within moments, followed by a distraught Jessica. "John, why haven't you been answering my calls?" Jessica pleaded. "Jessica, I am no longer your sweetheart and we have nothing more to talk about. I have initiated divorce proceedings and anything that needs to be communicated can be handled through our lawyers." I said firmly, "Please John, don't do this without consulting me." She pleaded in desperation. "What can you say to justify your infidelity? It certainly wasn't an act of violence like the one I witnessed and have proof of." I retorted, my tone unwavering, "You had better call your lover David and tell him I am dealing with him tomorrow. Perhaps his wife will see things differently. His wife will have a different view of the matter than I do. Oh God, can't we talk about it, please, John?" Jessica pleaded, her voice trembling. "Please, go away, Jessica, my dinner's getting cold." I replied firmly, "But I'll give you that. Why don't you take a moment and write me a long letter explaining how you're rationalizing the destruction of your wedding bow ties? I'm sure a smart lawyer like you can make it clear that this is all my fault. How can you still love me?" Jessica sobbed and turned away, but before she got to the door she looked back at me. "Please John, don't end our marriage without talking to me." "Goodbye Jessica," I said. My tone was firm. After she had gone my parents were still sitting in their seats. They were stunned by the exchange. "John, that's cruel," said my mother. "Mom, would you like to see the pictures I have of her and her lover?" I replied bluntly that she had no respect for me at all, and I couldn't live with that or trust her anymore. As I left the house on Monday morning, a wave of sadness came over me at the thought of leaving John behind, but I couldn't help but feel excited at the prospect of starting a family as soon as I returned. The trip to Denver was uneventful, and I found myself sitting next to David Price, the chief negotiator, and we had a good rapport. David and I had formed a strong negotiating team long before I got married, and our camaraderie was palpable as we became accustomed to each other's company. About 10 years ago, however, our relationship took a turn for the worse, and we convinced ourselves that intimacy was simply a means of relieving stress after a heavy day of negotiating, reasonably believing at the time that it wasn't cheating on our wives if it contributed to our professional success. After John and I had been married for a couple of years, I began to feel uneasy about our intimate encounters with David, and we eventually ceased such activities. However, during a particularly stressful negotiation, David suggested revisiting our arrangement to ease the tension. I don't know how or when John found out the truth or how he got the incriminating photo, but when I opened my laptop the next morning I was paralyzed by what was displayed on the screen. David, who was sitting next to me, reacted quickly. He slammed the lid of the computer shut with a bang and demanded a temporary halt to the negotiations. We retreated into the hallway, his anger spilling over. He asked me, "What's that mess on your desktop?" "I'm not sure, but it's definitely you, and that's probably me down there, although my face isn't in the picture. Did you put your laptop aside yesterday?" "No, it was with me the whole time I was traveling. It was in my suite when I went to your room." "Did anyone get into your room with a camera?" "I'll take care of things here. Try to contact John, find out where he was last night. It couldn't have been him. I spoke to him last night at his parents' house. Did you call his parents' number?" "No, he asked me to call his cell phone." "Oh, that's a problem. He could be anywhere. Call my cell phone while you're on the phone with him." The receptionist called me a cab and I was back at the hotel in less than 15 minutes. I went straight to the front desk and asked if anyone had entered my suite. It was then that I realized with a jolt that my marriage had probably come to an end and that the man I cherished most had disappeared, but I was determined to fight to win him back. Upon returning to the suite, I immediately attempted to call John's cell phone, which was turned off at his place of work, but I left an urgent voicemail stressing the importance of him contacting me as soon as possible. His secretary told me that he was in California on business and expected to be back tomorrow, so he had gone to California and maybe stopped by to surprise me on his way back. I sat alone in my suite with tears streaming down my face. There was no way for me to contact him except to go home. I picked up the phone and hurriedly booked the next flight to Louise Street. "Jessica, I feared we were both facing divorce, and even worse than that, what could it be? God, I should have realized it. Losing John would be like the end of the world for me. Losing my family would be devastating as well, but your priority right now is to get back to Louise Street. Try to reason with John, see if you can salvage the situation. I have to find him and talk to him. I'll keep you posted on how it goes. I have to stay here until the negotiations are over, and I'll be eagerly awaiting an update from you to say goodbye to us." Where after hanging up the phone and packing my bag and laptop, I went to the lobby to check out and utilized the hotel's Lango service to get to the airport. I pinned everything on him being rational about my cheating behavior and assumed it was nothing more than a meaningless gesture. His indifference and detachment almost sickened me, and his complete lack of empathy in telling me that he intended to file for divorce, making it clear that he had no interest in talking to me and insisting that nothing I said would change his decision, and his suggestion that I write a long letter detailing my side of the story felt like a final stab in the gut, and then I excused myself and went back to my car, where I shed tears. We will never share the joy of growing old together or revel in the joy of children and grandchildren. In my personal despair, a selfish fear made me think that by the time I found another partner, I might be too old to conceive. After a sleepless night filled with disturbing visions of Jessica and David intertwined, I woke up early and went downstairs to my parents' house to make coffee, and with a heavy heart, I retrieved my laptop and camera, determined to sift through the images stored in them. There was a detail on his right arm which reached up to Jessica's chest. Zooming in, I found what I was looking for: a tattoo. Zooming in further, I found that it was a heart with J-Mate's name engraved on it. Janet was David's wife. Taking this tan in evidence, I went back upstairs and took a shower and got ready for work. I went to Human Resources and asked to see Scripture Richard. We had crossed paths at a relatively small company and had even played golf together. I placed a set of photos from my folder in front of him and I waited for his reaction. What was it? John Chad's expression was both curious and amused. "I'm sorry, Chad, these photos may look revealing, but that's my wife and David Price. As you can see by the date and timestamp, the photos were taken Tuesday night at David's hotel suite in Denver. They were there to negotiate on behalf of the company. What do you want to do?" "Well, you can fire both of them for just cause under the Anti-Friends and Family Clause in their contracts with the company, and I've instructed my attorney to start drafting the paperwork, but if you don't take action, I'll have no choice but to take legal action against the company, and yes, John, I'll submit this to our legal department and then start the process." And he expressed shock and concern, and when I asked for a week's vacation, he readily granted it. I promised to think about it and provide him with my decision when I returned to work the following week. As I walked out of Hubert's office, his secretary Lucy stopped me. "John, your wife is here to see you. She said she would be back later." "Under no circumstances do I want to see my wife. Please tell her when she gets back." "Oh John, I'm so sorry. I didn't know there was a problem here. It's a big problem, Lucy. We're getting divorced. She and David Price have been dancing the horizontal tango. I dialed Janet Davies' wife's number. Although we had crossed paths at the company picnic, I knew that my revelations about our spouses would have a big impact on her. Janet, this is John Baker. How are you doing? John Davy mentioned that you might be contacting me, but he didn't say why. Janet, we need to talk as soon as we can. Of course, John. Can you come over now? 00, but I'm free now. Do you still live in Frems? Yeah, that's right. I know where you live. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Hey, John, come in for a cup of coffee? I just made a pot of coffee. Janet pointed to the living room. That's great. Janet just made coffee. Please come right back with it. But in the end, I opted for the direct approach, eager to get things off my chest. Janet, I have to tell you something tricky. I ran into your husband and my wife together in Denver. I'm in the process of divorcing Jessica and firing both of them, but it's going to be public soon, and I want you to be prepared. If you'd like to see it, I've got the pictures to prove it, and while I've always hoped that it wouldn't be true, David's always been a loving husband and father, and I didn't want to face the possibility, but I realized that eventually something would come to light that would expose their affair. From my own point of view, I also felt sorry for the consequences that might befall Davy, who was of an age where finding another job with a comparable salary could be challenging. Janet replied in a low voice, I'm really sorry, Janet. I can't just let this go. Jessica and I are going to start a family soon, but I can't build a future with someone I don't trust or respect, and the mother of our children will need both of those qualities. Let me reiterate how sorry I am for what you and Jessica have been through, and I'm sure she will be just as sad and sorry as David was when he found out that I knew he was having an affair. If there's anything I can do to help, please feel free to let me know. My sincere apologies. I'm ready to leave and go back to my parents' house. This morning I received the final agreement officially ending my marriage to Jessica. I haven't spoken to her or seen her since the day she left for my parents' house. My attorney handled everything on the divorce decree, and without a steady income, she had no choice but to sell the house and ended up taking a huge financial hit in the process. Initially, she tried to contest the divorce, but I issued an ultimatum that she either sign the divorce papers within 48 hours or I would amend the grounds of divorce to adultery and publish incriminating photos of her and David on the internet. Under pressure, she acquiesced within the allotted time, which is why I am now a free woman, and it seems she still decided she didn't want me enough. I couldn't help but wonder if she had revealed to him the details of our divorce and the reasons behind it. Perhaps I should have opened up to him myself after Janet and David's divorce. David was struggling financially and managed to find a new job, despite the fact that he had been fired from his job. I settled in Santa Maria, a quiet seaside town between the Bay Area and Los Angeles. I also found a female companion in the same apartment building who, like me, was divorced, but we found comfort and fit in each other's company. Given how often I travel, trust is crucial in any potential relationship, especially if we're considering starting a family. The ticking of the biological clock reminds us that time waits for no one, which prompts me to consider making an early move. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please consider bookmarking and subscribing, and if you haven't already, feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below.